Well, thanks for coming by. This is the future of insights and analytics. Our facilitator is Elaine Boxer, and she's managing director for SC Ventures. It's a hybrid investment and consulting firm. She's also a graduate of the Wharton School. Welcome, Elaine.
Thank you for having me as the facilitator of this panel.
So let's talk about theme number 1, needs and solutions today. What were you hoping to gather?
So we opened this panel with a relatively broad question because we were hoping to understand these panelists' biases and to understand their vocabulary when they talk about market research needs. Before we biased them or prompted them in any way with very specific questions, we just wanted to understand what their needs are for market research today and how do they think about it? How do they go about it? And what solutions do they tap into?
Curious to get into what you found. Let's talk about the panelists that sat in on the conversation.
So we got a great set of panelists because they are so senior and they are so appropriate to the question. So it's a lot of marketing leadership, folks who are actually in brands, who make the marketing decisions, whether they are chief marketing officer or head of marketing. A lot of CMOs here who are notoriously hard to recruit. So it's fantastic that we got them all on this panel to share their own experiences. So this is a panel where we are not only tapping into the expertise of subject matter experts, but we're actually talking to our target audience itself and hearing what their perspectives are.
You know, Elaine, I was looking over your executive summary, and it sounds like a really spirited discussion regarding best market research.
Yeah, it's a pretty broad set of responses from this group. Anytime you have an area or an industry that is in flux, that is in shifting in some way, you're going to get a lot of chaos and a lot of opportunity. So it's very interesting to hear this group share a varied set of perspectives on what is market research and what do they use it for.
Well, let's get into key point number 1 then, because it looks like there was quite a few takeaways here.
Right. So one of the things we wanted to understand is before you even undertake market research, what are the drivers for why you're doing that? What do you believe you need input in order to accomplish? What decisions are you making? And so we got a range of responses. The primary one that we heard is this idea of client needs or consumer needs or market needs. So when they think about, I need to undertake some market research, the first thing and the primary thing they all think of is, I want to understand the needs of the target audience that we're going after, which makes a lot of sense. We also heard things like, more specifically, I want to understand the customer journey. They also talked about understanding the effectiveness of their marketing, campaign metrics, A/B testing, things like that. And they also talked about understanding customer segments, not only in order to serve them, but just understanding, who's the most profitable segment for them right now. And then they also talked about undertaking market research to inform the messaging itself of advertising or content marketing or product packaging or whatever it is. Market research was seen as a solution for understanding the content that the brand needs to be producing. So it was interesting, Falguni here talked about when he's looking at client needs and pain points, how do we get at that? He listed out various methodologies for deriving that. He talks about surveys and interviews and client advisory boards. So he was bringing up a lot of these sources that a lot of the other panelists didn't necessarily touch on. So it was great having his perspective. And then you can see a couple of these other folks here. You see Vicky at the bottom talking about daily marketing campaign information and monthly overall marketing metrics. That's very important. That's essential data to have, but it's a really interesting response to the question, what do you need market research for? Because that is not market research, is it? It's really about understanding how your campaign is performing once it's already in market. Actually, at the end of this conversation, when we talk about theme 2, we are going to be pivoting toward that question specifically.
Right. So I know in key point number 2, you got into some of the specifics about what the panel uses and what they recommend. Tell us what you learned here.
Exactly. So once they told us why they're asking the questions, we then asked them, how do you answer those questions? And again, this was unprompted because we wanted to hear, what does this audience think about when they think about undertaking market research? And it sort of validated what we suspected we're going to have to work with going forward, which is it was a pretty broad set of tools, a very broad set of inputs, and a lot of people defaulted to very quantitative, text-driven, passive data collection. So there's a lot of discussion of CRM databases or marketing and campaign metrics, sort of the inbound stuff. They say, I want to learn about the market. Yes, I'm looking at the results of my campaigns. Or they said, I look at industry news, which is great because there's a lot of forward-thinking, insightful stuff there, but it's by definition not tailored toward their particular brand or their customers or their solution. They talked about social listening, which is great, but it's passive, right? And then a few folks actually talked about the kind of stuff that our client focuses on. So somebody cited customer advisory boards. I think that should say focus groups. So focus groups and market surveys. These are all more deliberate, designed, outbound forms of research. And I think that's where we really want to probe our panel's experience and needs going forward.
Yeah. So I'm really curious then, what were the overall thoughts about research teams? Was there a consensus from the panelists?
No consensus. It was very varied. And I think this captures where we are in the industry right now. We're looking at, the role of dedicated research teams is shifting. The participation and leadership that is required of the marketing teams now in designing and carrying out market research is shifting. And so you get, folks across the board here talking about their relationship to research teams. Some of them still rely on their research team to define and carry out insight derivation from a centralized point of view. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have some marketers who don't have a research team at all, either because company's too small or it's too new or that's just their mindset. So this is going to be an interesting space for our client to navigate going forward. You're going to be having conversations with people who have a pretty broad range of experience with pure research and pure research teams. Some of them, as I said, rely on them totally. Others have none. And then there was an interesting group of people that saw their output as raw data or starting point. And there's a whole range of other perspectives in there as well, where they take that data and then turn back to their research team and say, okay, now go carry out phase 2. It's definitely shifting. So I think one of the takeaways for our client is that you're going to have to understand where a particular end client is in their thinking. How do they use their research team internally? What are those internal skill sets at their company? And then how do you tailor your recommendations to that brand based on their available internal research resources and their attitude toward those internal resources, which is actually also a question that we get at, unsurprisingly, in theme 2. Among other things, we're going to be asking this panel what they look for in their internal team.
I just think you're brilliant the way you've drafted this sort of holistic overview of what they're thinking and the why behind their thinking. I think that's just brilliant. So tell us about these top 3 panelists that contributed to this go round.
Yeah, as I mentioned, we have a great group of marketing leaders, and our first contributor here on Vesha, I would urge the clients listening to this or watching this to go back into the panel and look at her complete answers, because my summary here can't really give credit to the completeness and insightfulness of her responses. She contributed a tremendous amount. And then from the other perspective, Anthony was more, he's a data architect. So he's looking at how do you build the platforms to derive these insights, particularly for doctors. So, he came at it, how do we build the pipes that inform folks like Envesha? And then our third contributor is always great. He has a great perspective, and I've actually worked with him before on other panels, but Falguni had a lot to say, and also his answers were really comprehensive. All of their answers were so comprehensive and insightful, and especially since our client is going to be using the voices of these customers to present at a conference in Texas in a few weeks, I would definitely recommend going and looking at their raw answers and trying to find those turns of phrase. They were really great contributors.
So I know you've teased us a little bit with what's coming up in theme number 2, but tell us again, where are we going in our next conversation?
Right. So as I mentioned, theme 1, we opened up a little bit broad because we wanted to hear their unbiased thoughts. In theme 2, we're going to drill down a little more specifically, and we're asking them where their unmet needs are and what are they seeking in market research but not finding. Where do they think the gaps lie? And then, as I did tease, we are specifically asking them, what are you looking for in your internal research capabilities? And even further in the future, as you can imagine, we're going to shift and ask them, what are they looking for in their external assistance with market research? So more to come. I
can't wait for our next conversation. This sounds fantastic. Thank you again, Elaine Boxer. She's Managing Director for SC Ventures. They're a hybrid investment and consulting firm. She's also a graduate of the Wharton School. And Elaine, we will talk again.
Thanks again, Gene. I look forward to it.